welcome back. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into today's gripping story. If you had walked down that street that night, you might have stepped over the little shape and hurried on. The wind was like a knife, and the town felt empty, the sort of cold that makes people look at the ground and pray for a door. But Maya didn't walk past. 16 years old, a bed at the shelter, no parents to call. She looked up at the right, second, and a life looked back. A frozen German Shepherd puppy lay collapsed in the snow. It was breathing once every 30 seconds, maybe less. A stiff little body curled tight under a crust of dirty gray ice, paws folded in against its belly, ears pressed flat like paper. Steam didn't rise from its nose. Nothing moved but the slow, stubborn lift of its chest. Maya didn't need to think. She knew that if she didn't pick it up right now, it would die here, in the middle of a town that felt as cold and still as a graveyard. Wind sliced the hollow street, throwing bits of sharp ice that stung her cheeks and made her eyes water. She had been heading for the corner grocery, head down, collar up, counting minutes and dollars in her mind to keep her body moving. 3 blocks from the shelter, 2 cans of soup. Get it done. Get back to warmth. Then the streetlight above her flickered. Its thin cone of light fell into the gutter and lit a small lump half buried where the drift had pushed against the curb. Trash, she thought. Maybe a scarf or a brown paper bag. She would have kept walking. Then she saw it. A rise, a faint fall, not trash. A breath. "Hey," she whispered, the word almost carried off by the wind. She stepped off the sidewalk. Her boots ground into the packed snow with a dry squeal. She crouched, sliding her gloved hands under the puppy's ribs. It weighed almost nothing. The shock of that icy fur made her gasp. It was like picking up a handful of winter. "Don't think," she told herself. "Move!" She stood and tucked the frozen bundle inside her coat, pressing it tight to her chest. The heartbeat against her ribs was faint and uneven, but it was fighting. That was enough. The grocery could wait. She turned into the wind, eyes narrowed against the sting, and ran. Her breath came out in quick bursts, little ghosts in the dark air. The town stayed silent behind her, just the slap of her boots, the hiss of snow on the street, and that small, stubborn heartbeat trying to match her own. The shelter door stuck, then gave. The hallway was dim. The heat barely softened the bite of the air. Maya kicked her room door open with her boot, lungs burning. The bundle in her coat was still too quiet and too cold. She dropped to her knees on the worn rug and yanked her zipper down. The puppy slid into her hands like a piece of ice fur-like wire, frost stiff along the edges of the ears. "Come on, don't stop now," she muttered, teeth set. She threw a folded blanket on the floor, set the puppy on it, and pulled another blanket from the bed, wrapping it snug. She shoved the space heater, close until the orange coils glowed like a tiny furnace, then cupped the pup's paws in her palms and rubbed them fast, firm, repeating. No flinch, no sound. The chest rose, fell, waited too long, rose again. She grabbed the old hair. Dryer from the desk, fought the tangled cord, plugged it in. Low setting. Warm air on the belly, then the chest, then the sides, never in one place too long. She kept the dryer moving, and kept her hands moving, and kept her voice moving too. "Stay with me. Please stay with me." Still nothing. A thought slipped in, like a draft under a door. So this is what it is to be left in the cold until you stop moving. She pushed it away. She grabbed her phone. "Dr. Hargrove? It's Maya. I found a puppy. He's not..." Her voice cracked. "He's barely breathing." "I'm on my way," he said, steady and quick. "Keep warming. Do not give up." She ended the call and leaned over the still form, pressing her cheek to its side. There it was, a faint, uneven thump. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered, tightening the blanket as if her own heat could barter with the night for just one more breath, and then one more after that. A knock hit the door hard and fast. Maya jumped up, still clutching the bundled pup. The door opened and Dr. Hargrove stepped in. Tall, wrapped in a heavy parka, a worn leather bag in his hand. Cold followed him in like a shadow. "Let's see him," he said, voice low and sure. Maya knelt and spread the bundle beneath the heater's glow. The doctor peeled blankets back with careful fingers, felt along the rib cage, checked the gums and eyes. "Weak pulse," he said, "but he's stubborn." Heat packs, a tiny syringe, a bottle of warmed electrolytes. Tools appeared from the bag as if the bag had been waiting for this very room. He slipped the needle under the skin, the fluid slid in. He switched heat packs. He rubbed the chest in small circles. He worked fast, steady, quiet. The smell of wet fur and antiseptic met. The smell of the old rug and dust. Minutes stretched thin. Then a twitch, small as a blink, ran down the puppy's side. Maya's head snapped up. The eyelids fluttered once, then again, then opened. Cloudy, confused eyes found her face. It was like watching fog pull back from a window from the inside out. "There you are," she breathed, her voice breaking into a smile she couldn't stop. She reached out. A cold nose nudged weakly at her fingers. Heat ran through her like sunlight. She scrambled to the kitchen, found an old ceramic bowl, and filled it with lukewarm broth they kept for hard nights. The puppy lapped slowly, awkward, and determined. "That's a good sign," Dr. Hargrove said, giving a rare nod. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, holding the bowl steady so it wouldn't skid. Something heavy and good dropped anchor inside her. This wasn't only a rescue. This felt like a beginning, like she was tied to this small life in a way that made the world make sense again. By morning, the pup could lift his head without wobbling. Maya fixed a small corner near the heater. 2 folded blankets, a metal water dish, and an old tennis ball from the shelters lost and found. Then she sat and watched him the way you watch a fire you don't want to go out. She named him Shadow. From the first steps he could manage, he followed her. If she crossed the room, he crossed it. If she sat, he curled by her shoes. Her footstep on the hall tile made his ears lift and his eyes light. When she went to her grocery shift, Mr. Albright, the owner, let Shadow curl behind the counter while she stocked shelves. Customers stopped to pet him. Even the tired ones smiled when those dark eyes looked up. Back at the shelter, Maya brushed the last ice crystals out of his coat, checking the pale places for frostbite. He leaned into her hand, eyes closed, a soft hum in his chest, like a little engine. At night, she told him quiet pieces of her day, small truths she didn't share with anyone else. Within a week, they had a rhythm. Morning walks before the streets, woke. Afternoons at the store. Evenings on the shelter steps, watching the sun pour itself out behind the buildings. The wall she felt between her and the town started to thin. People nodded. People asked his name. People asked hers. All because of a dog who seemed to know she had once been as lost as he had. One bright afternoon, the kind of winter sun that looks warm until you step into it, Maya was on a ladder at Mr. Jensen's, passing shingles up while he patched a leak. Shadow should have been on the grass chewing the tennis ball. The sharp bark that cut through the steady rhythm of the hammer made her freeze. Shadow stood by the back steps, body rigid, tail up, ears forward like arrows. He barked again, short, urgent, then trotted to the rear door and back to Maya, then to the door again, as if drawing a line she was supposed to follow. "What's got into him?" Mr. Jensen called from the roof. "I don't know," Maya said, already climbing down. Shadow scraped at the door with his paws, whining in a low, worried sound that made the hair on Maya's neck lift. She turned the handle. A breath of air met her, sharp and wrong. The kitchen smelled like gas and something acrid. Shadow shot past, nose down, headed for the narrow hallway. That's when Maya saw her, Mrs. Jensen, on the floor by the pantry. One hand curled around a chair leg, eyes closed, skin too pale. "Call 911!" Maya shouted, voice louder than she knew she had. Shadow circled the woman, whining, then pressed himself against her side like he could keep her from slipping away any farther. Maya dropped to her knees and checked breathing. Shallow, but there. She stayed with her, talking the way nurses talk. In movies, keeping her present, counting breaths until the sirens wailed close and the paramedics stormed in. Shadow wouldn't move even when they lifted Mrs. Jensen onto the stretcher. He only stepped aside when Maya tugged his collar and told him they had done enough. Later, Mr. Jensen told anyone who would listen that the dog saved his wife's life. Maya didn't need to be convinced. She had seen how Shadow moved, straight, to the trouble. No pause. And as they walked back to the shelter in the quiet after the ambulance left, Shadow pressed to her knee. She felt a strange, steady certainty. This wouldn't be the last time. The sirens that woke Maya a week later reached her before the smoke did. She sat straight up, heart racing, listening to the rise and fall of that sound cutting through the dark. Red light flashed across her wall in broken strokes. Then the smell, bitter, sharp, real. "Maya! Fire!" someone shouted down the hall. She yanked on her coat. Shadow was already at the door, hackles up, ears pinned toward the noise like hands cupped to listen. They stepped outside into a street gone wild, neighbors yelling, people spilling out of the building across the way. Thick smoke curled from a second-floor window. Flames licked the frame like hungry tongues. "Kids are inside!" someone cried. Maya didn't think. Shadow surged forward, tugging her toward the entrance. Heat hit her face like opening an oven. She coughed but followed him in. Inside was a world of smoke. It clawed down her throat and stung her eyes until they ran. Maya banged on doors with her fist and shouted as loud as her raw throat allowed. Shadow darted ahead, barking in short, sharp bursts, throwing that bark against closed doors and waiting for answers. One door stayed silent. Shadow raked at it with both paws, claws scraping wood, barking until Maya squared her shoulders and drove her boot into the lock. The door gave. A small room, gray with smoke. In the far corner, a toddler sat on a bed, eyes huge and glossy with tears, frozen by fear. Maya scooped the child up, tucking the small body into her coat just like she had done with Shadow on that first night. He backed out into the hall ahead, of them barking, a metronome, a guide, a voice to follow. They stumbled back outside into the freezing air where paramedics rushed forward. Shadow stood close, sides heaving, eyes scanning the crowd as if counting the ones who'd made it out. At night, word spread fast. By morning, everyone in town knew the story of the dog who'd found the child before the firemen did. Maya sat with Shadow, on the shelter steps, his head resting on her knee, the both of them smelling faintly of smoke. She watched the rising sun burn away the last traces of the night, thinking how close a life could come to being lost, and how a single heartbeat could tip the balance. She knew this was no longer luck. Shadow had something in him, something that could change lives. After the fire, something shifted. People who used to pass Maya without a glance now stopped to talk. At the grocery store, customers asked about the hero dog, and she'd smile. Awkward. At first, then with a little pride, while Shadow wagged his tail like he understood every word. Mr. Albright started keeping a jar on the counter labeled for Shadow's treats. Coins and small bills piled up fast. Kids from the neighborhood came by the shelter just top at him. Even Mrs. Jensen, still pale from her collapse weeks earlier, brought over a hand-knitted scarf for Maya. 4 cold nights, she said. Maya found herself, speaking more, answering questions, telling the story of the fire, describing how Shadow barked until she kicked in the door. Each time she told it, she realized she no longer sounded like someone watching life happen from a distance. She was in it now. Shadow, always at her side, seemed to pull her into the world. Morning walks turned into short chats with neighbors. Ursons took longer because someone would always stop to scratch his ears. At the shelter, the staff asked if she'd help with the younger kids' homework. She said yes. One evening, sitting on the shelter steps with Shadow's head in her lap, Maya looked out at the street. The air was crisp, the windows of nearby houses glowing, warm. She thought about how small her world had been before and how wide it felt now. It wasn't just that people saw her differently, she was starting to see herself differently too. The rain had been steady all night, but by morning, it was a roar. Maya stood at the shelter window, watching water swallow the sidewalks. The river that ran along the edge of town had burst its banks. Sirens wailed somewhere far off. Then came the shout. From outside, kids on the roof. She ran to the door. Across the flooded street, a small house sat like Annisland, water churning around it. On the roof, 3 children huddled together, arms wrapped tight. A rescue team was forming, but the current was vicious, brown with debris. Shadow was already pawing, at the door, whining to be let out. "No," Maya said at first, but he barked loud, sharp, and she saw something in his eyes that made her grab the coil of rope from the supply shelf. She tied one end around her waist, the other around Shadow's harness. "Take it to them," she said, her voice shaking. The moment she opened the door, Shadow plunged into the water. The current grabbed him, but he fought through head high, legs cutting against the pole. Ma braced herself, rope burning against her palms as she fed it out. On the roof, the oldest child reached, down. Catching the rope, Shadow delivered between his teeth. Within minutes, rescuers on the bank were pulling the kids across one by one. Therapy taught, Shadow swimming alongside each until they reached safety. When Thala's child stepped onto dry ground, Shadow staggered out of the water, side-sheaving, fur slicked flat. Maya dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around him, feeling his heart slam against her chest. The rescue captain clapped her shoulder. "That dog just saved 3 lives," he said. Maya didn't answer. She just buried her face in Shadow's wet fur, knowing no words could match what he'd done. For a long moment, they stood in the cold, the chaos fading into the sound of the river. Maya thought about how much had changed since the day she first carried him out of the snow. Then the world rushed back in. News crews, voices calling his name. The flood rescue spread through town faster than the water had. By the next day, a local news van parked outside the shelter. Cameras filmed Shadow trotting at Maya's side, still a little stiff from the cold water, but tail high. Reporters asked her to describe what happened. She spoke simply, hands in her coat pockets, eyes flicking to Shadow. Every few sentences as if to make sure he was still there. Invitations started arriving. The county fire department offered to evaluate Shadow for professional rescue training. A regional animal rescue group wanted to feature his story in their newsletter. Mr. Albright read one letter aloud, a scholarship fund willing to cover Maya's high, school completion and a training program in emergency response. At first, it felt unreal. Maya had spent years feeling invisible. Her life contained within the walls of the shelter, the aisles of the grocery, the same 3 blocks. Now, strangers knew her name and Shadow's. Training sessions began on crisp autumn mornings at the fire station. Shadow learned search patterns, hand signals, and scent work. The instructors were impressed by his focus, his quick learning, the way he seemed to anticipate commands. "It's like he already knows what we're going to ask," one trainer said. For Maya, it was more than training. It was a path one she could walk with Shadow at her side. She imagined a future not defined by where she'd started, but by the people they could save. One evening, after a long day at the station, Maya and Shadow walked home along the river. The water was calm now, the street lights glowing on its surface. She glanced down at him and thought, we've both been pulled from the cold. Now we get to pull others out too. A year had passed since the morning Maya found a frozen puppy under the snow. Now she stood on the small stage in the town hall, a modest crowd filling the room. Neighbors, firefighters, children clutching programs with Shadow's picture on the cover. Shadow sat at her feet in his new red rescue vest, head high, eyes steady on her. She took the microphone. The day I found Shadow, I thought I was giving him a chance to live, she began. Her voice was calm, but carried a weight that made the room quiet. But the truth is, he gave me my life back. She spoke of the fire, the flood, the countless training hours, and the way Shadow had changed how she saw herself. Each story brought a murmur from the crowd, some smiles, some tears. Shadow, as if sensing the moment, rested Haishin on her boot. When she finished, Thimayor stepped forward, presenting a framed certificate and a medal for outstanding service to the community. Cameras flashed. Maya bent down, fastening the medal to Shadow's vest, her hand lingering on his fur. After the ceremony, they walked home through the cool evening. Streetlights painted long shadows on the pavement. Maya thought about the year, how it had stretched her world, filled it with faces, voices, and moments she would never have known without him. On the shelter steps, she sat down. Shadow leaned against her, warm and solid. She whispered, "No matter where, we go next. We go together." Somewhere in the quiet, she realized the truth. The girl who had once been invisible now had a purpose, and it had started with a small heartbeat she'd felt in the cold. One that now beat beside hers, steady and